Mary Sayers, a very warm welcome to you all to this forum entitled Recognising and Promoting Rights, Children and Young People with Disability. I'm Brian Babington and I'm the CEO of Families Australia based in Canberra. And may I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're all situated today. I'm on the beautiful land of the Ngunnawal people in Canberra, and I pay my deepest respects to them, their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you all very much for attending. This year, Families Australia is celebrating its 20th anniversary. We're a national peak NGO that seeks to strengthen social policies by bringing the views of people with direct lived experience and NGOs and advocates that serve them to the national policy making table. Before handing over to Natalie Wright, our facilitator, I wanted to set the scene just a little bit. This forum aims to help create new and additional opportunities for children and young people with disability and their representative organisations and advocates to gain a seat at the policy making table, to be actively included in developing and implementing national public policies, plans and frameworks that span all elements of their lives. One of the very important pieces of national policy work currently underway is to design the next 10-year national framework for protecting Australia's children. A key learning from the current national framework spanning the last 12 years is that it's vitally important to take a more inclusive approach, to genuinely and respectfully hear and act upon the views of children and young people in policy design and implementation. And it's in that spirit that today we look forward to hearing directly from young people and advocates about key issues facing children and young people with disability, so these can be reflected in that national framework going forward and indeed other government plans and frameworks. I'd like to say a very warm welcome to our great guest speakers and to our facilitator. Natalie Wright, our facilitator, is a highly respected disability rights lawyer and advocate and founder and principal lawyer with Equality Lawyers. Welcome, Natalie, and I'm going to hand it over to you to take forward, please.
Thank you so much, Brian, and hello to everyone around the country. My name is Natalie Wright, and by way of introduction, I identify with the pronouns she, her, and to describe what I look like, I'm a female with long blonde hair, wearing a mustard-coloured top and a native flower scarf, and there's some artwork sitting behind me. Now, before we get started, I would just like to alert everyone to the fact that this session is being recorded today. If you do not wish to have your face recorded, please turn off your camera now. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we're meeting today virtually, and I am meeting with you from the lands of the Kaurna people on the Adelaide Plains. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any First Nations folks watching today, acknowledging that settler colonisation is an ongoing structure and that sovereignty was never ceded. Now, it is my less exciting role today to do some of the Zoom housekeeping. And then once I've done that, we will move into the amazing content that we're all here to be part of. Now, if you would like to view the person who is speaking, that would be me right now, please click on the speaker view and come out of gallery view. And if you're using an iPad, that will be on the top left-hand side of your screen. If you have any technical issues, you may send a private message to our tech support person, Sue, in the chat, and she's waving right now. The chat function will be available throughout today's forum, and you can use the chat function to ask questions or to make comments. We would ask everyone here today that you be respectful of one another's contributions and that you are inclusive. We know that there will be a number of different opinions and experiences presented today. And it's important that we respect those opinions and experiences as they are presented. We also ask that all speakers and participants, that if they are asking a question or providing any content that is sensitive, to provide a content note so that people can choose not to hear that sensitive information as they wish. When you are introducing yourself, if you're going to speak, we also ask that you share with us your pronouns where you feel comfortable doing so, and that you provide a audio description of what you look like on screen for those who would like to receive that information in that way. So having gone through the housekeeping, I hope that I have covered all of it. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome the first three speakers that we have joining us today. We are joined by Chloe. Sorry, I was experiencing some technical difficulties there. We are joined by Chloe Polglaze, who is a young person with lived experience and will share with us some of those experiences. Liana Buchanan, the Commissioner for Young People, Children and Young People Victoria, and G Brown, who is a young person with lived experience. Now, we will present this in a panel type scenario where they will each share with us their views individually, and I will go through the speakers in turn. So we will start with Chloe. Chloe is a queer, autistic, disabled woman who is currently studying civil engineering at Monash University. Chloe has a keen interest in disability justice via advocacy, inclusion, acceptance, and awareness. She recently received the Vice Chancellor's Diversity and Inclusion Award for her work amplifying disabled voices, particularly for the creation of COVID-19 policies on the university's academic board. She is currently the Disability and Carers Committee, on the Disability and Carers Committee at Monash Student Unit Association, and is president of the Monash University Philharmonic Society. Please join me in making Chloe feel welcome, which is unbelievably silent when you're on Zoom. But I imagine that everyone is waving her down now. So Chloe, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your involvements with policy?
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. So my name is Chloe and I use she, her pronouns. And I am calling today from the contested lands of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri peoples. A visual description of myself is that I am a white woman with brown hair and I am sitting in an office filled with plants and books and all sorts, and I'm wearing a brown shirt. So a bit about myself is that I am a university student. I have been a university student for quite a while now, and we'll touch on this later. I've done most of my policy work through the university's academic board, which is responsible for the quality and policy aspect of academia at the university, and it serves 80,000 students, including multiple campuses and some of them being international campuses. And I did a lot of work through there last year working on COVID policies and compassionate grading. I've also been involved with the student union for a number of years. Currently, I'm on the Disability and Carers Committee. It's actually the inaugural Disability and Carers Committee, but I've had a number of roles with the Student Association throughout the years. So today, I'm going to be speaking on about my experiences with policy as a disabled youth, and all of these experiences are interlinked. Content notes for this entire discussion are systemic ableism and direct lived experience of systemic ableism. So we are pushed out of education, struggle to access welfare payments and the NDIS. We have mountains of medical costs, but no financial supports or even supports in general. We work to try and support ourselves to get through, but it's not sustainable and can worsen our disabilities overall. A one-size-fits-all approach never works, especially when these approaches fail to consider such a diverse group as disabled children and youth. The current systems in place don't support us, and it's setting us up for failure and for a life of poverty. And and these things I'm going to discuss today.
Thanks, Chloe. So you touched on some of your experiences with higher education. Could you please elaborate on what you see as some of the current issues with policy in this area?
Sure, thanks, Natalie. So I personally didn't know about my university's disability services until 2019, and I actually started in 2016. We've created this society where disability is so taboo that people are scared to access supports due to the stigma. Not only that, it's so taboo that no one talks about it, there's no awareness, so people don't even know that these supports are available or if they're eligible. And this interlinks with self-advocacy. We spend so much time self-advocating. Many of us make a joke about how being a disabled person at university is an extra subject in its own right. Last year, rather than studying for my final exams, I had to spend 4 weeks trying to have a pre-established access need facilitated. Student advocacy couldn't help me. My disability coordinator couldn't help me. Only with sustained pressure from me was I able to secure something. And the something I secured wasn't good enough. It resulted in me being supervised for 8 hours in my own home, 2 hours longer than the duration of my exam. When I said I would need to sleep after my exam as I'd be exhausted, I was told, that's fine, just bring the Zoom into your bedroom. This would not be accepted if it was a non-disabled person. Our privacy is never considered or respected. The next semester, I was able to ensure that this sort of thing didn't happen again. Through the academic board, when we were discussing exam start time flexibility, the conversation only considered international students in different time zones. If I wasn't on the board to raise the issue of disabled students who need this flexibility, we simply wouldn't have been considered. And that really highlights how not only do we need to be actively considered in every policy area, we need seats at the table. Higher ed is designed to be very one size fits all. There's not a lot of room for flexibility. I've been told previously that because my degree, civil engineering, has so much group work, I should study something else. Because it would be too hard to apply my accommodations to the group because it would look unfair to everyone else studying. It'd be too hard to ensure that I was put with peers who are understanding and don't discriminate against me and harm me. Just too hard. So better off just studying something else that I can do on my own with no support. uni is very rigid, course maps are rigid, every aspect is rigid. And this is part of the issue that disabled students face, because we have a lot of varying and kind of phases of better health and less good health. And this rigidity really prevents us from participating. There's a lot more flexibility given to temporary illness, but once you're disabled, people stop being accommodating. Finally, a recent example of disabled students not being considered at a federal level is the higher ed bill that passed recently. This bill decided that kicking people off help for failing too many units was the way to go. The only people this will affect is disabled people and people in crisis. And yes, there are exemptions, but adding exemptions just puts the burden on disabled people. If you need an exemption, you're likely to be going through a lot and will be struggling with the administrative process. Universities already have systems in place to support students failing units at this sort of level. They have a much more personal relationship with the student. The government intervening only adds an extra layer of distress that's not needed. It was sold under the idea that if you're failing this much, the course isn't right for you. What an absolute falsehood. No one fails that much just for fun. There are always more factors going on, and this sort of attitude unequivocally fails disabled people.
Thanks so much, Chloe. In your introduction, you mentioned how the barriers for young disabled people are all interlinked. Could you please elaborate on how this is based on your own lived experience?
Sure thing. So a massive intersection for me is the welfare system and the higher education system. I'm in this fun little area of being disabled, but not disabled enough. And sadly, this is an all but too common experience for disabled people. At the end of last year, I was kicked off of youth allowance, and because I'd been at uni for too long. I tried to talk to them and say, look, I have a disability and this is what's made me take so long to do my course. And they informed me that because I never dropped down to 2 units, that my disability doesn't count. And so I got kicked off of youth allowance and forced onto job seeker. But no one told me about how disability and job seeker works. And if I hadn't mentioned that I was disabled on accident to someone I was on the phone with, I never would have got this job capacity assessment done, and I would have put onto full mutual obligation requirements for job seeker. These sort of systems where there's a maximum allowable time to study really only impact disabled people and people experiencing hardships. I was told that finding a job is the utmost priority, and if uni interfered with getting a job, I would have to drop out. Yet another cog of the system working against me and my future. I'm less than 3 months from graduating with a civil engineering degree with honours, yet I may be forced to drop out because of my disability. How does it benefit anyone? Damning me and my peers to poverty, a life on the pension, rather than supporting us through higher education. I personally cannot get the DSP. If someone doesn't have 20 points in one single impairment table, they have to do 18 months of JobKeeper. But this rule is only the case if you are under 35. This is direct discrimination of younger people. I personally sit at about 40 points overall, but because they're not in one category, I'm still not disabled enough. Even if I was to get the DSP, you can't realistically study and get the DSP. There are so many things in place preventing you from studying and getting the DSP. So another facet of the job seeker system is disability job agencies. And they're really not set up to support disabled students in higher ed. They lack understanding, and there seems to be an expectation that if you are using such a service, that you're incapable. I kept being told about how my engineering career is a dream job, rather than just a job. Engineering jobs are not hard to get into. They'd like, you get your degree and then you get into a job. It might be hard to find a job that you love, but it's not a hard industry to enter when you've got the accreditation. And yeah, I've been told that that's a dream job. Just focus on being a receptionist or something, filing paperwork. And it just, the expectations are so low for us that we're constantly getting this narrative reinforced that there is no future for us. It's just condemning us to a life of poverty.
Thanks, Chloe. Are there any other policy areas you would like to talk about today?
Yeah, there are a lot of intersections of policy, and it's really hard to tease them out and talk about specific ones. But the reality is that the current system is further disabling us. We're running ourselves further disabled trying to fight it. We don't have life savings to fall back on being youth. We're too poor to afford treatments and medications. ECPs don't do enough. They're the plans that you get to get your 5 specialist sessions a year. With regular and quality treatment, my back injury that I have could have been fixed. Instead, I've ended up with a very likely permanent disability. Because I wasn't privileged enough to be diagnosed as a child, because I wasn't lucky enough to be brought up in a family where things like that were noticed, I'm priced out of lots of medications that would help me. And instead I have to take alternative medications that don't work best for me. Mental health services are also another area. The 10 sessions and 20 for last year and this year aren't enough, and finding someone who will bulk bill, especially that's specialized in disability and specific disabilities, is really difficult. Which we, as young people, we're trying to navigate all these systems, but we don't have the money to do it. I have a friend who, even with the ECP plan, it would cost her like over $1,000 to get the 5 sessions with the physio that she needs for her condition. And so now she's not able to get any treatment for that. And she doesn't know, like, obviously you're never going to be able to tell, but if she got that treatment, would she be better off? Is this creating a path for her where she's going to lose a lot of her mobility because she was priced out of treatment? And as a young person, if you don't have a family that's supportive of disability and supportive overall, you can be overlooked and there's really little you can do. We're left to fend for ourselves with no supports, no financial means, and no policy to consider us.
Thank you so much for sharing these experiences, Chloe. Is there anything else you would like to leave us with?
Yeah. So everything seems to be built on this idea that we are lying. We have to prove to some high standard that we aren't lying. Policy is made with exemptions that put the burden of proof onto us instead of just considering us. It's lazy policy making. An exemption isn't enough. Just consider us instead of putting the burden onto us. Yes, you have to think a bit harder. And yes, you have to put in the work to consult with disabled youth. But these workarounds, these lazy exemptions are not good enough. Not only are they not good enough, but they're actively harming us. And the time to act on it was yesterday. And on that note, I would like to thank everyone who's come today. Attending forums like these is the first step of many, and the time is now to start platforming young disabled voices. I'm looking forward to seeing what changes your organisations make following this forum.
Thank you so much, Chloe, for those very, very important contributions that you're making to the conversation that we're having today. I would now like to move us to Liana Buchanan, the Commissioner for Children and Young People, Victoria.
Thank you, Natalie. And if you can see me, you'll see a little clapping hand at the top of my screen, which I've now put up because I was I thought Chloe's presentation was so incredibly powerful, and it's gone now, which makes me happy because I didn't want to disclose to you all how poor at tech I am. I too would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we each, wherever we are in this country, are sitting or standing today. I'm on Wurundjeri country, and I pay my deep respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I use pronouns she, her. I'm a white woman with shortish dark brown hair and glasses, and I'm sitting in an office that has behind me bookshelves and cupboards. I'm incredibly honoured to be able to be a part of this discussion today after the likes of Chloe and before G, who we're going to hear from in a minute, to be part of a conversation that is ultimately about the rights of children and young people with disability. Now, if we needed a reminder of how important that rights discussion is, we saw it just earlier this week on an ABC News story about 6-year-old Kyan, who was born with cerebral palsy, who with his family are under threat of deportation because of the costs associated with Kyan's health and care needs. Now, it's not my place to comment on immigration policy, but I think that kind of decision is telling in terms of how we still, at a community, in government, in many of our systems, view and value children with disabilities, and indeed how we view or fail to view what they contribute, what they bring, all of the strengths of these children and young people. Now, today, bearing in mind the context that Brian discussed about the work underway to develop a successor to the National Framework for the Protection of Australia's Children, and because, unfortunately, a lot of my work looks at the pretty pointy end of rights failings, I'm going to talk about the right to safety for children and young people with disability. I'm going to touch on how well I think we're doing when it comes to delivering on that right for children and young people with disability, and a little bit, very little bit, on what some of the issues are that I think prevent us from doing so. In my observations today, I'm going to draw on what I see in my various functions. I won't cover them all, but I'll particularly draw in my role oversighting child protection and at-home care services, which includes reviewing services to children when they die after being involved with child protection before their death. It also involves a whole raft of systemic inquiries that we've done at the Commission in recent years into the out-of-home care and child protection systems. And I'm also going to draw on a bit on what I see administering what we call a reportable conduct scheme. It's a scheme that means that I oversee investigations into every allegation of physical violence, sexual misconduct, or other abuse of children in organisations and across a whole range of settings. Before I go further, I want to give a content note. I will be talking about issues around child abuse and neglect and the ways in which I see systems failing children. I will not talk about specific cases, but nonetheless, these will be the themes I'll discuss. And if you want to, you might want to switch off for 10 minutes, and that will be enough. So my first observations about safety and issues around safety, children and young people with disability. The Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse provided us with pretty clear evidence of the extent to which children with disability have been disproportionately victimised in institutional settings. As I just described, I oversee a reportable conduct scheme, and in that work, where we see allegations of harm against children in a whole raft of settings, I continue to see that victimisation in a range of ways. Since we started the scheme a few years ago, we've seen hundreds of allegations of harmful conduct towards children with a disability in schools, in out-of-home care settings, in disability service settings, and other areas. Around a quarter of those allegations are ultimately substantiated. One of the things that I'd note is that we see a particularly high proportion of allegations of physical violence against children and young people in these settings by workers, by volunteers, by adults in these services. And I do have to say, I won't give the kinds of examples, you can imagine them, but more broadly, I would say based on that, I see a level of physical violence and a level of acceptance of the use of physical violence towards children and young people with disability that I think just isn't accepted towards other children. If I turn to the work that we do and what I see in terms of issues for children and young people with disability in the home, we know, I'm certainly don't have time today to detail it, we know our systems for protecting children, whether it's the statutory child protection system or the broader range of services, child and family services, we know they're overstretched. We know they struggle to meet need across the board. I see that daily, I've documented it elsewhere. But what I want to talk about today is what I see in that in terms of the very particular consequences for children with disability, where particularly where their parent or their parents are unable for a whole range of reasons to provide them with care and to meet their needs. We, as I said, we do inquiries looking at services provided to children whenever a child dies, having been involved with child protection. Most, if not all of those children remain at home, they're not in care. And we did some analysis that we have not published but provided to government of 72 child death inquiries that we looked at in a 4-year period where the child had a disability. And we saw, at a very high level, we saw often child protection's assessment of risk to children didn't factor in the child's needs as they were related to their disability. They didn't kind of factor in what that might mean in terms of the child's needs, in terms of the care and support that that child might need, and in terms of what additional supports that family might need. We also saw services reconcilers. We saw health and disability service providers responding in a way that assumed the child and young person had an active, proactive carer who was capable, who didn't have a whole raft of other issues compromising that ability. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, we saw child and family services and child protection not seeking out information about the child's full range of needs and not taking those into account. And the bottom line, that service fragmentation meant no one agency fully understood the extent of risk for those children or the extent of harm being experienced by those children, and no one took responsibility for addressing it. These children lived with, at best, poor quality of life because of these service silo issues. And they also often lived with significant physical and emotional suffering. And in the worst cases that I've seen and that we included in that analysis, these service failures contributed to the child's death. I worry because some of these issues that I'm describing pre-existed NDIS, but they have been exacerbated under NDIS. I now see cases where different services are kind of pointing the finger at each other, trying to work out who should take responsibility for supporting a parent to get a child an NDS plan. I see other cases where there is a plan that has been approved, but the parent or parents, for whatever reason, are refusing services. And again, the consequences for those children and young people can be devastating. My view that I'm trying to convey is that if you're working on safety issues for children and young people, and you don't have a clear articulated focus on issues for children and young people with disability, you are missing some of the most serious issues and most serious system failings. I'm going to touch on two other issues that I think really go to undermine the safety rights of children and young people and contribute to the kind of service system that I've just described. One is lack of visibility and focus. Children and young people generally are often invisible in the policies, the strategies, the decisions that affect their lives. That invisibility is more pointed when it comes to young people with disability. Disability-related strategies focus on adults often. Child protection strategies focus broadly and don't have that clear focus and element that addresses the issues for children and young people with disability. When I look at it, that invisibility is both reflected and reinforced in bad data collection, poor data collection. Every forum has to mention it, but its impact is real. It means that the prevalence, our insights into prevalence of issues for children and young people with disability are reduced. It means systemically, we can't understand and provide the support that's needed because we simply are not identifying who those children and young people are. For example, in the child protection and out-of-home care systems that I've been talking about and that I monitor, until 2018, disability status wasn't consistently captured at all. Since then, it's only been captured for children coming into the system. So as a result, when we look at department data, it tells us, for example, in one instance, one inquiry we did last year on young people leaving care, the department data suggested that 10% of young people about to leave care had disability. When we looked into files and did detailed file reviews, actually that proportion was more like a third. The consequences of those for those young people is that their range of needs were not being met and factored in. And so the chances for them of being able to meet their aspirations, meet their goals was very, very substantially compromised. If we can't see young people with disability, we certainly can't hear them. And this is the last point that I'll make. It's really about lack of voice. And that's the whole purpose in part of this forum. I first want to say I see this lack of voice in individual cases. We see it. We see it when we look at child protection responses, when we look at children in the care system, for example, and the number of instances where children are the subject of reports, the assess to those children is being the risk to those children is being assessed, sometimes repeatedly through multiple reports, and no one ever speaks directly to that child. I cannot tell you how often I see that. I cannot tell you how many of our inquiries we've used to raise that as an issue. We see it also in our reportable conduct investigations, even where an allegation of abuse of a child is being investigated. In many cases, the child themselves, the child with the disability or the young person with the disability isn't interviewed. So the key part of evidence available isn't obtained. That's at the micro level. At a macro level, certainly, if we don't seek children's views when we're trying to understand whether they're at risk or we're trying to understand what's happened to them, we certainly don't do it in a systemic way. We just don't have systems that make sure we hear and act on the voices of children and young people with disability when engaged in policy and service development. I mean, my view is we're not great at seeking out children and young people's views generally. We've got a history of paternalism that means we rarely even think of doing it. And this is particularly the case for children and young people with disability who are kind of, I hate to say it, I think there's an assumption it's going to be too hard to engage, too hard to get the views. And there's underlying assumptions about whether they'll have anything of value to contribute. Now, we just heard Chloe. We know that is nonsense. We know that when asked, children and young people with disability are full of ideas and have incredible clarity on what's needed to improve their lives and the lives of others around them. They have to have a seat at the table if we're going to improve the ways in which we support and care for them and indeed support them to live their lives. It's my very strong view, and I'll finish with this, that if you are providing a service for children and young people with disability, if you're developing policy wherever you are in government that in some way affects children and young people with disability, if you're designing service responses that will impact them, frankly, you're not doing your job unless you build in a process to make sure you get their input, you hear and act on their expertise. I commend CYDA and Families Australia for this forum. As I say, I'm really privileged to be part of the panel and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for sharing those absolutely vital insights that your office has gained through your work. It is now my absolute pleasure to introduce to you all G. Brown. G is a proud trans, queer, and disabled person who believes in being a key disruptor to the system. They currently live and study on unceded Wurundjeri, Woi, Warragon, and Ratharakon land. Evidently, I'm not in Victoria. Oh my gosh. He lives and breathes social advocacy and justice for everyone with a specific interest in disability, LGBTQIA plus youth, and mental health through the lens of policy, education, and awareness, and his own lived experience. They are also a current board member for Encompass Community Services and involved with children and young people with disabilities Australia. Welcome, G.
Thank you so much, Natalie. So before I begin, I would like to pay my respects to the land that I am on today, unceded Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung land of the Kulin Nation. I acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that may be joining here today. So a visual description of myself: I am a white person with blue eyes that match my short blue hair. I'm wearing round gold and black glasses, dark blue over-ear headphones, a silver metal nose ring, a multicolored necklace, and finally a black and orange knit sweater. I also go by they, them, and he, him pronouns. Before I begin my talk, I'd like to give a content warning for medical ableism, educational ableism, systemic ableism, brief allusions to and mentions of violence, and strong emotion. So today I'm here to share with you my lived experience. A lived experience which is deeply personal and individual, but it's a common reality among many disabled youth. It's a lived experience which is impacted by the policies put in place that are supposed to protect me. My lived experience, while individual, is not isolated, and there are many people like me and the people I will reference today who have faced similar discrimination. So it's only very recently that I got diagnosed with my disabilities, and the process is still ongoing. It's been a long, tiring, emotional, and violent process, and medical professionals are held to a standard to keep their patient and public health in their best interest. And their career and their teachings are centered around the betterment of the individual and community. So this leads me to question why it took me almost 4 years to get one single ultrasound. Why I sat in doctors' offices on the verge of tears as they degraded me, why I was so terrified to ask for any sort of diagnosis. And this isn't a one-off incident. It's since the age of 12, I've been gaslit and bullied by medical professionals. I have a right to diagnosis, I have a right to treatment, and I have a right to management. So why do medical professionals lose their sense of ethics when they're faced with a young disabled person? As though they can smell my fear, they can feed off the years that I've been told by society that I'm making it up, that it's all in my head and I need to grow up and get over it. Medical professionals have a lack of education in how to care for disabled people, and so instead they often become defensive. The education that medical professionals are given is so blanketed that it fails to recognize that young disabled people are not monolithic, we're not static, and we have complex needs that need to be approached as such. As Chloe also mentioned, my lack of diagnosis until my older age also meant that I have been barred from accessing many services that could help me, and I've quite often have to dip into my personal savings that I've earned to pay for any of my medical treatments and managements. The following problem that I'm talking about does not just reside with medical professionals. It occurs in schools, workplaces, NDIS, Centrelink, so on. There is an intersectional problem, and when you speak up about something, we're often told that we don't know what we're talking about. And when a disabled person speaks up, we're often told to get over it, or even just get blatantly ignored. So you can imagine what it's like being a young disabled person to speak up. We're never believed, we're taken for granted in what we say. I've wasted hours of my life, wasted thousands of tears, and needed mental health support because no one would believe me. When I tried to apply for VCE, special consideration, I had to have forms filled out to prove that I could be granted provisions. I understand why this is in place, but as a disabled person, it's incredibly dehumanizing to have someone write those forms for you. It's dehumanizing that the medical professionals get to choose what they think you need. And it's dehumanizing when my disability goes up in front of a panel and is judged as being worthy or unworthy. The education system is not suited for disabled students, and instead society thinks it's easier to segregate many disabled students from mainstream students. We're told that special schools are places of education for young disabled students that are tailored to their needs, but these schools often cause harm, not just on young disabled people, but on the wider community. My brother goes to one of these schools, and he also goes to a mainstream school part-time as a part of a program. Prior to this program, his development was quite limited before he had the opportunity to access mainstream school. He started speaking better because he was interacting with a broader range of people. His social skills increased, and he got the opportunity to play sports, which is what he loves. All of a sudden, he really began to thrive and gain opportunities, all because he could start going to a mainstream school. It's important to recognize as well that his presence in a mainstream school is just as important for those around him. Many of these students have never encountered a disabled person in their life, especially not an intellectually disabled person. And when you segregate people, everyone loses the opportunity to learn and prosper. And these mainstream students will continue to grow up with a lack of knowledge on disability, with stigmas, stereotypes, and ableism, because they are also denied the opportunity and right to inclusion. My own experience with school has always been bittersweet. I've always been good at it, but it has caused me an insurmountable amount of mental pain. I was bullied yet again by students who were not educated, who didn't understand me, that thought I was weird and annoying. And education in Australia, or really anywhere in the world, is not built to accommodate disabled youth. These curriculums, especially VCE, are squeezed into tiny little boxes that students must sit inside themselves to do anything that equates to great achievement. These boxes and these rubrics that they go by do not account for people like me, the autistic student who can write an essay better than the teacher. But because I'm unable to write essays the way that this curriculum wants me to, I begin to suffer. There needs to be more leniency for students like me and for disabled students who aren't like me too. There needs to be consideration of all disabled students because it is your curriculum, it is your education policies that are failing us, not us failing the curriculum. There needs to be more support in schools for disabled students. For example, my high school had one tiny little room dedicated for assisted learning, and I recall seeing no more than 3 learning aids over my 6 years of high school education. That says to you that not only is the curriculum not built for us, but neither is the infrastructure. Schools should really not be allowed to open and educate students until they can open and educate and accommodate everyone. Disability services such as the NDIS are quite notorious in this space, and while I have to agree that this scheme is quite revolutionary and has benefited so many lives, it needs to keep progressing alongside us. The NDIS is a dictionary example of when you throw money at something and it appears with no governance around it. The abuse, neglect, and mistreatment that slips through the cracks of the NDIS is what harms us. I have a story of a young man in New South Wales. He is under the care of a provider who is funded and supported by the NDIS. This young man has had the police called on him and was tased while naked for not complying with his carers. His behavioural characteristics are exacerbated by the fact that the people who care for him do not know how to care for him. He has lost a majority of his NDIS funding due to organisational corruption and a lack of safeguarding. Carers under the NDIS need stronger policy and governance, and especially training. We are letting people who have very little competent or extensive training care for human lives. Carers and support workers are getting paid for not understanding the disabled person they work with. The NDIS is really great at warehousing disabled people, and they're getting us out of the way until they can clean their own act up. The current independent assessment legislation yet again is proof that the NDIS moves too fast and too hard. The NDIS and its Safeguarding Commission is one that is reactive, not proactive in protecting young disabled people or disabled people in general. And investigations, policy, governance, and safeguarding only happens when it's too late and when something has already happened to us. Disabled people from young to old need to have their right to safety secured, and we need to be informed, reviewed, and involved to ensure the NDIS is focusing on the people it serves instead of the money and bureaucracy it manages. I want to end on discussing identity. As mentioned in my bio, I'm a young, proud, disabled trans person. My trans identity and my disabled identity is intersectional, and I cannot be recognized as one or the other. There is nothing to protect my intersectional identity. When you fail to recognize us holistically, when you fail to include us totally, you fail to protect our lives. Policy cannot be written and implemented unless young disabled people in all of their intersections have a seat at the table. This includes First Nations, diverse genders and sexualities, the culturally and linguistically diverse, the intellectually disabled, the physically disabled, those suffering from mental illness, those who are drug dependent, the low socioeconomic, and the chronically ill. Policy will never work for the people it is supposed to work for unless that policy is informed by us, written by us, and approved by us. You are not the ones who these changes reflect. Myself, my peers, and my community will be the ones in 5, 10, 15 years' time finally putting in place what governments now have failed and neglected to do for us. And by then, how many of us will have fallen victim and prey to the ill-informed policies you write about us now? It's time to include us and recognize us and put us at the forefront. We are not a monolith for you to talk over, and you will never be able to protect and serve us until we are there with you. Nothing about us without us.
Thank you so much, G, for sharing your lived experience and your fundamental views about the way forward for Australian policy for children and young people. I'm confident that no one here today will think again about drafting a policy concerning any young people without consulting disabled children and youth after hearing from Chloe and you. We're actually going to take a 10-minute break now and then come back for the panel featuring Mary Sayers and Brian Paddington. So if you could all return to us at your, now I'm in different time zone to most people here, it's my 1:35, which is your 2:05. Is that right, Mary, or others that are in the east? Yes? Okay, great. Now, if you would like to actually leave the Zoom space, you can return to us by clicking on the link. Otherwise, feel free to turn off your cameras and your microphones, and we'll be back with you. Thanks so much, everyone. Be back soon. Welcome back, everyone. I'll just give a couple of seconds for everyone to run back to their computers in case they were at the kennel or checking emails. Thanks everyone for rejoining the session. In the second hour of today, we are going to hear from Mary Sayers, the CEO of Children and Young People Australia, Children and Young People with Disabilities Australia, and Brian Babington, CEO of Families Australia, who are going to talk to us in some more detail about the ways to improve the visibility, rights and safeguards of children, people and young people with disabilities in national plans and strategies. Now, after Mary and Brian have had an opportunity to speak with us, we will move into a collective discussion as a group where all speakers will be invited to discuss ways in which we can move forward. And we will invite everyone here today to provide comments and questions and contribute to the discussion. So to lead us into this second hour, Mary Sayers, welcome.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we're meeting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and always acknowledge that this always and will be Aboriginal land and sovereignty was never ceded. I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people on the call today, and all people with disability who are on the line. For those of you who are not familiar with Children and Young People with Disability Australia, we're the national representative organisation for children and young people with disability in Australia, and our members are predominantly made up of young people with disability and families and caregivers of children and young people with disability. So there are a couple of things that I wanted to say, but before I do want to thank G and Chloe for their words. I think they're hard words to hear, but we need to hear them. And Liana, also we need to be having these difficult conversations, and we need this disruption to make change. So in answering how do we ensure the rights and safeguards of children and young people with disability are included in national plans and policies, you were sent a briefing paper before this, and I'd encourage you to read this. And in that we stated that children and young people with disability are often overlooked or missed in public policy. And this is both in child and youth specific policies, but also in disability specific policies. So we do need to address this. And from the paper, you will have seen that in a review of 56 national and state policies, they found that references to children and young people with disability were minimal at national documents aimed at children. However, when they were referenced or mentioned, it was primarily in terms of their vulnerability, rather than in their rights and in their inherent strengths, and how we as a society have to create the environments where those rights and strengths. So the focus is often on their vulnerability rather than their strengths. So as we've heard from Chloe and G today, these intersectional strengths and needs span multiple policy areas, not just disability policy. If we only conceptualise children and young people with disability in a service paradigm, rather than looking at their human rights and how these are enabled, we'll never be able to make progress. And I guess most importantly, children and young people with disability are children and young people first. They need just what everyone else needs. They need to experience all the richness of human diversity and all the wealth of opportunities that all children have. If we lock them into a narrow paradigm of disability services, we limit their potential and their ability to exercise their full rights for inclusion. So in terms of how do we enhance the visibility of children and young people with disability in policy and program design? There are a few areas, but it must start with giving children and young people with disability and their representative organisations a seat at the table and an equal seat at the table. For example, 57% of NDIS participants are aged under 25, yet there are very few formal consultative mechanisms that involve young people with disability or families of children with disability. Recently, the Independent Advisory Council of the NDIS formed a Child, Youth and Families Reference Group, which we have the pleasure of sitting on, but the majority of participants are adults. Children and young people are still missing. It's a good first step, but more is desperately needed. Additionally, despite 20% or almost 1 in 5 Australian students requiring reasonable adjustments in their education, there are very few mechanisms for them to have a voice at the school level or at regional or systems level. But this engagement must be appropriately funded, supported and accessible. Funding should be for disability representative organisations to do this work who are hugely connected to our communities and constituents. And sadly, and what happens too often when government consults, is they give the work to consultants who don't understand disability or have not worked with disability, then come to us and ask us to do all the work for free and don't have accessible ways including children and young people's voice. Second, if we need tangible actions that are going to improve the lives of children and young people with disability. So as mentioned earlier, the research shows that children and young people are missing across all the areas and intersectional. You heard from Chloe around higher education. You heard from G around education and disability services. Yet through ignoring the voice of children and young people with disability and not having policies that meet their needs, it is leading to poor outcomes. The system is actually leading to the poorer outcomes. And finally, thank you, Liana, for mentioning data. You know, data needs to be robust and collected on the experiences of children and young people with disability across their life course. There are data gaps at every age and stage, from early childhood education, post-school transition and employment, plus a lack of data when risks occur, such as experiences in child protection systems, exclusion from education, segregation, as G mentioned, which is so harmful for children and young people, and involvement in youth justice systems. So just a content note on this. It is extremely difficult to monitor the violence and abuse of children and young people with disability. We have weak protective mechanisms and we don't have harmonised legislation or oversighting bodies. If it's an NDIS issue, you go to the NDIS Quality and Safeguarding Commission. If it's an abuse issue, it will go to a commissioner who may or may not have different powers. In Victoria has very strong powers, but other states and territories don't have powers. And try and make a complaint about education. There's no independent monitoring and oversight. So
I'm loath to stop you there, Mary, but that's 7 minutes.
Terrific. Last sentence. We need the Disability Royal Commission to make very strong recommendations. It's a one-off opportunity to look at how across the federal, state and territories, we can have changes that will genuinely improve the life outcomes for children and young people with disability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing those very important views with all of us today. We will now move to Brian Babington, the CEO of Families Australia, to share his views from his side of the fence representing Families Australia.
Great, thank you very much. And look, can I first of all start by thanking G, Chloe and Liana and Mary for what you've said before. I mean, so many of the points resonate so deeply here, and and also with much of the work that Families Australia has undertaken over the last few years, particularly in thinking about the successor to this current national framework. And we did a lot of consultations around the country before COVID, many of the points that you've raised were also raised in other contexts. And I particularly hear loudly the calling out of the systems fragmentation, about how one size does not fit all, how we need to be more careful and person-centred in the way that we develop policies and deliver services. I wanted, though, to try and address with three quick points. I don't think I'll take the 7 minutes, that I think are going to be pretty important in moving toward government policy and also program responses that work better for children and young people with disability. And naturally, there are loads of things that I'll omit, but the three that occur to me as being particularly important are, first of all, the ongoing involvement of young people with disability in policy and program co-design. Co-design has become a bit of a buzzword at the moment. Not quite completely sure I understand it all, but in my lay person's way of thinking, it's about an equal sharing arrangement where people, government, non-government, representatives, community members, people with lived experience share a common table and can try to come together as equals, if that's at all possible, but with a spirit of collaboration. That's the sort of the hope that I have and we have here of good policy development, where one side, just because it's government bringing the money to the table, doesn't necessarily call all the shots, but co-design to me means that collaborative approach, which means that children and young people with disability need to be around those tables. There are a lot of young people's reference groups that have been established in recent years. It is a growing trend, I can tell you, across much of the work in the community sector. But the point here has to be that the interests and needs of children and young people with disability needs to be adequately, properly represented in those forums and in those various reference groups. We need at the national level proper mechanisms so that our policymakers and politicians hear those voices loud and clear and frequently, and not and those structures don't simply mean that young people come to a place like Canberra 3 or so times a year and say stuff and then go away and not much happens, or if anything, but that there's an accountability mechanism built in here that that in the spirit of collaboration, that they know what action is then being taken. And if there's no particular action being taken on the things that they say, reasons are given for it. So there's an accountability loop here that's built in, and it's all taken very seriously. The second point I'd make is about threading priorities relating to young people with disability through relevant national plans. We have, as some of the speakers have already pointed out, a huge complexity of national plans, strategies and frameworks in this country. And navigation and knowing what these plans and strategies do is actually an incredibly complex thing. With the work on the national framework, one of the key things that we've been saying to government is there are a plethora of plans and strategies out there, both at state and territory level and Commonwealth level, that relate to the lives of children and young people. But we need now to join these things better together. As Liana said, we do suffer from systems fragmentation. We also suffer from policy fragmentation, and far greater if it needs to be made to bring those policies, plans and strategies together, and so they're working much more in harmony with each other. And so the concept that we keep saying is a very important one is that if you take the issues facing young people with disability, you need to then thread those through the allied national plans. And you need to track them and give them priority. And so that whether it's a plan relating to, say, housing or homelessness, it needs to prioritise those issues for young people. My third point, my final one, is about political authority. I suppose the longer I'm in this job, trying to give advice to government about family and children's issues, I'm struck by how much information we have, how much research we have. And of course, we can never have enough of this. But where does it go if there's not political will to make change? It's really disappointing for me to see how in the rejigging of COAG and the National Cabinet arrangements, many of these social policy issues seem to have been relegated to a very far right-hand box on a page in terms of the structure of intergovernmental relations. I think this is a matter that needs to be put back as a top priority at the level of the National Cabinet, because I think otherwise we won't have an authorising environment that can drive proper change. And it again suffers from that fragmentation and a sense that this is an also ran as a policy issue. So I'm going to stop there, hand it back to you, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Brian and Mary. I'll invite now all of our speakers that we've had today, if they want to come onto their videos so that we know that they're there and ready and able to speak. We are now going to have a discussion, and I think that this is often the part of forums where a lot of the work happens, where people that are here today that I acknowledge are absolutely in powers of authority, positions of power and authority, and can actually take what is being said today and move it in a very practical and real way. I have a question to get us all started, but people are very welcome to put questions in the chat as they like. So this is open. My question is, there's been a lot of talk about the importance of having children and young people with disabilities at the policy table. How do we do that? Practically speaking, what does that look like? Brian said going to Canberra 3 times a year is absolutely not good enough, definitely not in wintertime, not great. And so what is it? Mary, Brian, Liana, Jean, Chloe. What does it look like? Yeah, Mary.
I'd love to hear from G and Chloe about this, but I won't put them on the spot. Maybe give them a little bit more thinking time while we're asking. I guess for me, it's got to be really purposeful design, and that you design from the beginning to include children and young people with disability. Often we get contacted as an organisation and it's very near the end of policy development and they say, oh, we need to include young people. And it hasn't been designed and developed from the start with children and young people. So I think it's from the start for me. But then the other thing is developing really strong, safe and supported ways of engaging young people so that the preparation work is there, that young people with disability are paid for their time, that they are, the power dynamic is really assessed and understood so young people can actually be there on an equal level playing field to everyone else. But I'll stop there because Chloe and G might want to answer that question.
Yes, and I that it's incredibly important. We just had a comment in the chat there that says it is incredibly difficult to include the voice of children under 4. And that's incredibly important and valuable, isn't it? Because that's often a group that faces some of the most disproportionate rates of violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. I'm just hearing, Chloe, did you have your hand up? Yeah, Chloe, go for it.
This not so much a comment on children under 4. That's not something I really have much experience or knowledge on. But as for getting disabled children and youth to the table, I think a lot needs to be done to empower us to use our voices. I think there's too much of a narrative that we can't speak for ourselves, that we don't really know what's going on, and more needs to be done to change that narrative for us so we are in positions to speak up and we can take the opportunities. And obviously it's a very cyclical system, like without empowered youth, disabled youth and children, you don't get people on those at those tables making the policies, which then disempowers the youth and children. So, but the thing is, both of those things need to be tackled, because it's all great to make these opportunities, but if you're not providing ways for disabled children and youth to interact with those opportunities, it's quite tokenistic. So, I mean, all I can do is commend CYDA's work in the leadership program that they have. It's actually, G and I have both gone through it, and there needs to be more of these leadership opportunities giving us the skills to sit at these tables.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chloe. G, what do you reckon? How do we get there?
I fully agree with what both Mary and Chloe have said. We need to utilize the organizations that are in place now. They have the contacts for people like Chloe and I and so many more young people. And it needs to be from the beginning of policy. It can't be at the end. We need to be there every step of the way. We're the ones that face the issues, so we know what the issues are. And as for the comment about young children under the age of 4, just ask them. As I said, kids are taken for granted. Kids are often framed in a way that they don't know what they're talking about, that they're too young. But kids are incredibly intelligent. Kids are smart, and they know when something is right and when they know when something is wrong. So we just need to get them involved. But we also need to utilize all the resources that we have. You know, all disabled youth, we were all under the age of 4 at one time or another. So even if you can't use young children, use the older young children that can talk about their experiences from that age and under. And also utilizing parents and carers. Parents and carers can speak on the behalf of their child. They can communicate with children in a way that may be difficult for others to do so due to a bond that they have with that child. And they're the ones that are more likely to observe what that child is going through. So once you utilize older children, disabled children, once you utilize parents and guardians and carers, and once you utilize the children themselves, you can get a more holistic view on how to really safeguard from every age.
Awesome, thank you so much, G. We have another question in the chat from Megan Voss. And Megan asks, thinking about co-design, how might policy people at the intersection of systems like NDIS, higher education, adult mental health, and transitioning out of care be supported to engage in co-design with young people with disability to identify and address these barriers? Good question. Very big question. Brian, please.
Thank you. I'll have a go at that. Hi, Megan. That really touches on a really critical point, because we have so many policy silos and departmental agency and also non-government organisation silos that need to be navigated. We often hear through our consultations that a significant disincentive to greater collaboration and involvement across these, whether they're work silos, professional silos, policy silos, is that the authorising environment, whether that's contracts that government lets with NGOs, or whether it's the way that governments themselves are structured in terms of a Department of Health and Department of Education and so on. These things can be not encouraging of collaboration and working across silos. How do you overcome it? Well, I guess I come back to saying again that you need to have a strong political and policy authorising environment that actually says to people, whether it's officials or workers in the non-government area, it's okay. And in fact, we encourage you to work more collaboratively across departments, across agencies. So we need, if you like, in terms of contracts, to put pricing signals there, which encourages organisations to think in these ways. But I think we also need basically a sort of a cultural shift and to work on helping to encourage people to take some of the risks, the leadership risks of working with colleagues in different ways. For instance, and I'll just end on this point by saying, a few years ago, we were involved under this national framework on protecting Australia's children with a really interesting project called Building Capacity, Building Bridges. And it was about trying to work with adult-related services that might have been working in areas like family and domestic violence, as well as children's services, and getting those adult and children's services to work much more closely together, because they don't always talk as you know, you might think that they do. Sometimes adult services don't think child, and some of our children's services don't think adult to the degree that is most optimal for delivering good services. And what we found was that while we couldn't get anyone to disagree that it was a really good thing to work across these boundaries, getting that change does take time and requires a lot of determined effort and some cultural shifts, as well as some pricing and contractual authorising shifts to make it occur. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Brian. Mary, your thoughts?
I'll say just a couple of things, Leanna, and then hand to you. I wanted to give a really practical example of when co-design doesn't happen and the unintended or maybe intended consequences. On Saturday, I had the pleasure of joining G and Chloe on the Young Leaders program to talk about the biggest change that's proposed to the NDIS, which is the implementation of independent assessments. So independent assessments are going to happen where a stranger assesses a person with disability, a complete stranger, in 3 hours, and that will dictate what's proposed, their complete funding package or access to the scheme. And the young leaders invited me in to talk about the detail, and I might be speaking for you, Chloe and G, but I think there was a certain level of horror at what was being proposed without any co-design, remembering that 57% of participants are aged under 25 on the NDIS, about what this was going to mean in their lives. And that's when we get public policy really wrong, when we don't consult from the beginning, because that means there's really unintended consequences. And the young people, G and Chloe and others on the call, would have loved to have had, I'm sure, an opportunity to say what this was going to mean for them and how could the NDIS design with them what needs to be done. So I just wanted to give that really practical example because, you know, G and Chloe were involved in that discussion, and young people are an afterthought in a lot of these policy spaces. So yeah, that was just my point.
Thanks so much, Mary. Liana, you have some views on this.
I do. I'll make a very simple point because I agree with what else has been said. That I just feel like there needs to be a shift in the expectation. There's a whole raft of expectations. If you're developing policy, if you're doing work for government, and I've worked in government, I've worked for ministers, there's an expectation that you will have regard to all of the relevant information and data and analysis and evidence. But we haven't yet built in an expectation that that essential evidence and data includes input from people with lived experience across the board. Then we certainly haven't built that in when it comes to listening to children and young people, and we certainly haven't built it in when it comes to listening to children and young people with disability. So I think, yes, we need adjustments, yes, but actually we need a fundamental shift in the expectations so that if anybody is developing a policy approach such as the one Mary's just described, or anyone's at a service level, if you're working up some new service delivery offering for children and young people, there should be an expectation that you don't do that unless you find a way to meaningfully get that information, co-design the process by which you get the information. That's the how. That's how do we support people? Mary gave the answer straight up. You include children and young people in the how. Here's what we're trying to work out. Here we know that we want to build in the views and input from children and young people. Work with us to help guide us so that we can do that effectively. It does take some thought, but it's certainly not rocket science, and it starts with a fundamental shift in the expectation about what's important when we're developing policy and practice.
Thank you so much, Liana. So, Chloe and G, I just wanted to circle back to you. That's such a meme, circle back. Anyway, but what supports can be put in place for people, so this is policy people, at the intersection of services, like transitioning from care, the NDIS and mental health, to address barriers to hearing voices of disabled youth, do you think?
I think it's really simple when I say it, but the supports are the organizations that already exist. Like, you don't even have to do the work of finding people and thinking what's the right people to talk about. Like, CYDA exists and it's done all that work in that it knows how to contact people to talk about these things. And so the support is already there. It's just, it's not about a lack of support, I think. It's just a lack of consideration and remembering that we exist, because there's already the frameworks in place to make or to do these things and to include. It's just got to be on people's checklists.
Absolutely. I think the answer is actually probably pretty simple, Chloe. I think that's spot on. Are there any further thoughts from any of our speakers? Otherwise, I have another great question. Yeah, G, go for it.
I think as far as barriers go towards hearing the voices of disabled youth, they're put in place by the people who write the policy. The barriers realistically aren't really there because, as Chloe said, the hard work has already been done. Organizations such as CYDA already exist. They are in contact with lots of youth, lots of disabled youth and children. We are there, we are accessible, but it's about the fact that the people who are writing the policy makers, are putting the barriers in place for themselves. It's not so much the system, it's not so much other people, it's the policy makers themselves.
Great. Thank you so much, G and all. And we're getting the thumbs up from Megan, which must mean that we've answered her question in absolute detail. Thank you so much, Megan. The next question that we have from Sally Robinson, hello Sally, is how can we reconcile the different ways that children and young people with disabilities are treated in policy? So yeah, that is such a good question. So I think really, Sally, and I hope I've understood the question right, is that there are different approaches to the way that policy will address children and young people with disabilities. And so how do we bring that all together? Mary, you're going to tell us how.
Look, it was interesting. We held a research symposium yesterday with Aracy, and it was really interesting because the different ways across even research, across policy, we consider children and young people can be from a very deficit model or from a strengths model and a human rights model. And for me, we have to start with human rights. When we start with human rights, we are at a better place than when we start with thinking about deficits and risk. So, and when we've got different disciplines, so health tends to think in terms of, you know, conditions and patients and disease. In disability advocacy, we think of the social model for disability, which is much more human rights based. So I think we need to have a narrative and conversation about rights first, and what are the rights of children and young people with disability as our starting point, rather than what are the perceived deficits. And I'll hand over to G, because I don't know if that's prompted a thought for you, G.
Yeah, G, tell us.
I very strongly suggest that as a starting point, the human rights model of disability is looked at and it's read and it's referred to. That's as a very general starting point. But yet again, I feel as though the solution is quite simple. It's feels very much how society has placed us in a way that we are different from everyone else, and so that our rights are different, which inherently isn't true. We deserve the same rights as anyone else, but in policy, it's yet again just being treated equally with equity. It very much comes down to attitudes of yet again, disabled people have something wrong with them, or there's a deficit, or we need to measure them in the way that they are capable. But that's a very narrow way of viewing a person. We are holistic, and when holistic needs are recognized, it's very easy. It becomes a very simple solution to solving that problem of the denied access to rights.
Sorry, I was on silent. Thank you so much, G. Chloe, yeah, please share with us your views.
I think that since like all of the policies not only are like siloed, I think is the term that was used, like fragmented, and the fact that they all have different approaches, the only way to get a unified approach to it is to start with like a national strategy specifically for this, and then that can be implemented, and then we have that, and that strategy obviously has to be co-designed, and then that's how you can ensure that everyone is coming at this from the same point of view, because otherwise you're going to end up with everyone doing what they think is best, and it's only going to further fragment all of the policy areas and departments as it is. Like, there needs to be something that unifies all of them before we try and get like 10 different people trying to do the same thing. Why not just create the one standard that we want to achieve, and then everyone can implement that and be held accountable to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for that. G, yeah, come back.
Just very quickly on the back of that, just for now at least, while it's an easy strategy, just pay attention to the Royal Commission. It's really a starting place as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, really true. So the next question that we have, which has come to me anonymously, but I feel like this question was always coming, and it's about money. So how do we make sure that we prompt government and organisations to ensure disabled children and youth are paid for their contribution? It's a budget question, I think. Maybe we should get the treasurer on the line. How do we make sure? Mary.
I'm going to say it, and apologies in advance to any consultants who are on the line today. And I know even some of our staff are ex-consultants. So, but the challenge is often government, when they have to develop a policy, will commission a consultant to help them do that. And then they will come to us and ask us to involve young people. Often we will say, is there budget to pay young people? Is there budget for accessibility? Is there budget for the pre-work that we need to do, the pre-work and the meetings we have to prepare young people so that there is a level power balance? Is there money for post-briefing? And often the answer is no. So government can procure services very differently. And it's not to say that there is not money there. It's prioritisation of how young people's voices are prioritised, I would say, would be my answer. But I'll hand over to Brian or Liana or G or Chloe for any other thoughts.
Thank you.
I mean, it strikes me, there are in a number of different organisations and sectors, there are kind of standards or frameworks about how to engage children and young people generally in an ethical, appropriate way. It strikes me that there is a need for some government endorsed standards that would, of course, then build into that. Again, here's me on about expectations, but that would build in an expectation that in a process, whether it's a co-design process or a consultation process or a process that kind of builds participation of children and young people in a different way, whatever that looks like, young people and children are contributing their expertise and their knowledge, and they should be reimbursed for that. So I think it strikes me, and there'll be people on the call who know much more about all of the different areas that have some of those standards or frameworks in place. We have our own at the Children's Commission, but in terms of government, something that establishes for government, something that then would apply across all of the departments where we want this to happen, that seems to be a sensible step.
Thanks so much, Commissioner. Jean, Chloe, did you want to weigh in on the budget debate, or shall I move to the next question? I'm in your hands, both of you. Should we move?
I don't really have a lot to add, because the prompting just is like, they need to see the inherent value that we have. And I don't know how to convince them of that, because everyone dismisses our value and the fact that we do have inherent value. And it becomes, it's not like you can just do one thing to fix it. It's really the attitudes that need a change. So I don't really have this is what a magical solution for you, because it's the biggest problem. How do we get them to understand our worth?
Yeah, absolutely. That is so true. And G's nodding away as well. So the next question, it's a practical one. And I personally love a practical question. I think this is absolutely what we're here for. So what is one tip, speakers, one tip you have for the organisations here today to ensure they provide a safe, inclusive and accessible environment for young people to be involved in? One tip. Oh, tell us.
Ask young people what makes them safe and whether they feel safe in your environment. Ask them and act on it.
Great. I love that. Mary, you do this every day. What's your one tip?
I think it's the same. Creating safe spaces that young people can say what they think, and don't be afraid of what they're going to say, because they will tell you the truth. And we need truth telling about their experience. But young people, you know, we need to provide supportive environments for them to feel safe enough, because when everyone else is in the room that's being, you know, in high-powered jobs and high-paying jobs, or being paid for their time, and there's an inherent power imbalance, you need to create an environment that young people, as Chloe said, are valued and their expertise is valued. And so, yeah, creating that safe space and asking, I would add on to Liana.
Thanks very much, Mary. Brian? And
only just to say, definitely ask, but be accountable.
yeah.
So with whatever you hear, and do that feedback and take it seriously. So it's not enough just to ask, but be purposeful about it.
Thanks so much, Brian. G.
I would really strongly suggest for organisations to put young disabled people in positions of power, of influence, because my own personal experience, I feel much more comfortable, I feel much more included and safe when something is being led by a young disabled person. As Brian said, asking is all well and good, but that doesn't ensure anything. You can very easily listen and not take action. So it's about taking action, and if possible, ensure that the people who are being represented are represented in the positions that are leading, that are managing, and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Chloe, your tip.
Mine, very practical, focusing on the access side of things, but to kind of not just to stand behind saying that you are an accessible organizations, make your events have non-negotiable access things like captioning and stuff like that. Make them a baseline for what you provide, and then always have the space for someone to request extra access. Like I mean, I'll go back to my experience with CYDA for our leadership program. Immediately when I got a position in the program, I was asked what access needs I had, and then I was told, these are the things coming back from listening to all of you, these are what we will be providing. Is there anything extra you need? Is there any way we could deliver this that will be better off? And it was always like I wasn't made to feel like my access needs were a burden. And I think that's really, really important, in that in elevating the voices of disabled youth, is that these narratives of burden aren't always so direct, and it can even, like, comments like, oh, like Auslan's quite expensive, or captioning's a bit difficult and stuff like that. That's putting it back onto us to make ourselves smaller. And if you really care about us participating, you will be putting in, really it's the money and the effort to make sure that we are accommodated.
Thank you so much for that, Chloe and G. Now, I have one more question, and Mary, you and I have 6 minutes to wrap this up, right? So I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to ask everyone to have an answer, but just keep that 6 minutes in mind. And as a lawyer, I can tell you how valuable 6 minutes can be. So let me try and get this out. Do you think, panelists, should we have a big, broad strategy for disabled youth public policy, or should we have individual strategies that cover off? And this is a bit of an iteration of a question from Ed Berg, I believe. So do we go big and be in the mainstream broader conversation, or do we go boutique and do we stay small? Mary.
Sorry, Chloe, would you like to go first?
I was just going to say that I think I kind of said this before, in that in order to make sure all of our values and everything is aligned, we need to have a big policy that does cover everything, that we can then, the smaller, more niche things can build from, like to ensure everyone's on the same page, heading the same direction, trying to manage all of these different places, trying to make sure they're all going the same direction, rather than just creating one centralized kind of direction for children and youth with disability, and then taking that and implementing it in the other places seems to make the most sense.
Yes, and Chloe, I also should say that Eddie had noted that you had inspired his question. So you're absolutely on the money there. Were there any other thoughts on going big or staying boutique? Commissioner?
Mary, you go.
No, you go first. I'm dying to hear what you say.
Both, right? We've got to do both. So I think absolutely, and I think that idea from Chloe was inspiring. Of course, we need to kind of have something that articulates across all of the areas that impact the lives of children and young people with disability, what it means and what needs to be factored in. But that doesn't displace the need for every single strategy and policy and area of service delivery and design to also take into account what are the issues for children and young people with disability, and how do we need to factor those in. So my answer is it's got to be both.
All right. And Brian?
Yeah, look, I've got to say I feel pretty much the same way as Liana, but just for historical reasons, when we started this journey with the national framework 12, 15 years ago, we thought this was going to be the one big policy piece of architecture nationally that was going to drive massive change in terms of child safety and wellbeing. The experience over the last 12 years is that, no, actually by itself, it has not been sufficient, nowhere near it, because it hasn't received enough funding and a whole bunch of other reasons. Now the strategy is to keep that, but say, actually it needs to be informing and influencing a whole bunch of other national strategies, like on family and domestic violence, like the health strategies and education strategies. So I'm with Liana, but I'm speaking here from the experience of the last decade or so with the national framework. You can do both, and history showed that we are now actually going to be doing both, recognising that the national framework in and of itself is probably not going to be the massive driver in its own right.
Thank you so much, Brian. G, you are going to have the final say for this question, possibly for today. For this question, most definitely.
I think the fact that majority of people here are saying both, I'm going to say both as well. I talked about the fact that about intersectionality, and that's exactly what needs to happen with policy as well. There can't just be one of the other, because it does not cover the complex, broad and intersectional nature of disability and young people with disability. To have one broad strategy or one broad policy is not going to, one, safeguard us, but having only the small individual ones are really going to also fail to safeguard us, and having both interplaying with each other is what's going to come out with the best outcome to ensure that all bases are covered, everything is considered, and the best possible outcome is achieved.
Thank you so much, G. Now, it's hard to wrap it up any better than that, but Mary, if you could do us the honours.
I'm gonna just say one thing before I wrap up, and that is I hope everyone in this room, apart from G and Chloe, have imposter syndrome, because I've certainly got imposter syndrome listening to you, because if we had so much more conversations with you and your fellow young people leading the way, we'd have all the answers. So I hope you're all, apart from G and Chloe, feeling the imposter syndrome that I'm feeling. You are the experts in your lives, and really want to thank you for leading the way and telling us what we need to do things differently. I'd also like to thank Liana and Brian, and particularly Natalie, for being our wonderful facilitator today. This is the first of these forums, and we will be holding another one, but we'll also be writing up the notes from today. So we'll be back in touch with you. And there was a little note in the chat. If anything we've talked about today is causing distress, please reach out for help. Thank you for having these hard and difficult conversations with us. And finally, thank you to all of you for participating. We have thoroughly enjoyed having this discussion with you.
Thanks so much, everyone.